Melissa Higgs. So Melissa is an architect and an associate at HCMA Architecture and Design, and she's talking about it's time to get back into the water, people. So please welcome Melissa.
Good afternoon. Thanks to Bill for having me here. Thanks for the introduction. As Mina said, my name is Melissa Higgs, and I'm an architect at a local firm called HCMA Architecture and Design. And I'm here today to pitch an idea to you guys in the 20 minutes that I have about an idea we have for a new type of public space for our city. And I want to say before I get started, it doesn't have a client, it doesn't have a budget, and you might be wondering, why would an architecture firm want to work on a project with no budget and with no client? So I'm going to just try and describe briefly a new initiative we started called Tilt Curiosity Labs. And what Tilt really is a platform or a means for our firm to get engaged and maybe start conversations we want to be a part of, to investigate ideas that we're passionate about, and really try to use the resources that we have within the firm to try and be part of positive change that we want to see happening in the city of Vancouver. We're working on a lot of what I think are some cool things, and I'm just going to pitch one of those ideas for you today, which, like I said, is an exploration of what might be possible for public space in Vancouver, and in particular, how public space might relate to our water's edge. Thank you. So I think what we can say about Vancouver is that we do a pretty good job of activating our public space. We reclaim our streets, we have car-free days, and we have temporary celebrations in our public spaces. We reimagine our parks, and we've got some really great park space, although we might take a position that there's not enough public green space in the downtown core. And we're increasingly becoming known as a city that is creative and that likes to play and has a growing arts and culture community. And I think without argument, we live in one of the most beautiful cities in the world. That's kind of without question. But we wonder to ourselves, when the Vancouver Foundation came out with its recent study, we heard a lot of feedback that Vancouverites are unhappy, we're unhealthy, we're disengaged. And I think a lot of that has to do with the idea that as a community, we're kind of lonely. And while I don't think that what I'm going to present to you today is going to solve all of those problems, we think maybe addressing our public space might be a step in the right direction. So one thing we know is that thriving cities around the world have great public spaces. And we would argue that right now, Vancouver just doesn't have that. So I think that the new improved Vancouver Art Gallery Plaza is going to be an incredible addition, but we're still lacking a place where people can really come together and build community, to celebrate, to protest, to have conversations. Changing tacks a little bit, Vancouver is a city that is surrounded by water, and I think it really defines us as a city. And we have this amazing public amenity called the seawall, 22 kilometers of a spectacular pathway around the city. But the real function of the seawall is to propel people. It's about movement. And I think it's also a lot about observing our natural beauty, which kind of relates a little bit to the glass tower architecture that we have in Vancouver that's really all in homage to observing the view. But we're asking ourselves, what about this? Where is an opportunity to get our feet into the water and to really step off the seawall and do something a bit different and engage with the water? So this is a shot of the city of Vancouver in 1931, where you can see even back then we've spread to the edges of our coastline, and we haven't yet begun to explore up onto the North Shore. And then taking a look at our city today, you can see it's a very, very dense city. It's one of the densest cities in Canada. In fact, one of the most dense urban cores in particular. So what that leads to in some ways is it's a desirable city. We're very dense. We don't have a lot of land left, and the land that we do have left is incredibly expensive. So it's prohibitive in terms of ways to address public space. So we started thinking about that as creatively as we could. And as architects, we quite often look to other places in the world for inspiration, and we know that we're not the only city facing some of these challenges. So we turned, again, as designers, as we often do, to Scandinavia, because they figured out a lot of things right. And we looked to Copenhagen, which has a similar context to us, and we learned about something they have there called a harbour bath. And I'm going to use their language because it's such a great way of describing it. They think of it as an urban harbour landscape, In other words, a terrace landscape that completes the transition from land to water. And I'm going to walk you through a couple of projects that we are inspired by that have led to some of the thinking that we are proposing for our project in Vancouver. And this is potentially a gratuitous photograph of my kids that I threw into the presentation, but there is a bit of a legitimate segue here. So I was really fortunate to be able to take these guys, go with my family on a tour of some of cities in Europe this year, one of which was actually Copenhagen. And this is a shot of them at one of the projects I'm going to walk you through. But the reason I really bring it up is a couple of things. First of all, while I know that my kids were incredibly influenced deeply by architecture and urban design and culture and language and food in all these cities, I realized that for them, the measure of success on any given day was, did they get to go swimming, and ideally, did they get to jump off of something in order to go swimming? So maybe just keep in mind the look of joy on their face, and again, I will segue back to this legitimately. So the first project I want to walk you through in terms of some of the inspiration for us is one of those first harbor bath projects in Copenhagen. And it's called Islands Briggs. And I just want to point out some of the key things that are significant for us. The first is, so this is kind of the floating swimming platform. And this one is really quite focused on swimming, but you can see it's in quite a dense neighborhood. It really takes some of its design cues from the existing urban grid. It's got some spaces dedicated for lap swimming. It's got some kind of beach entry stuff, some shallow entry. And then here, you'll see a recurring theme here, this spectacular tiered diving platform, which creates a lot of spectacle and overlook. But it also really focuses a lot of space here and kind of here along their seawall for just lounging, hanging out. You don't have to be swimming. A lot of great things to be doing in this space. And then this next project, which is where that photo of my kids was taken, is actually just across the harbor. So that's that project we just looked at in the background. This is a newer project, about 2 years old. This one is one of the first ones, like I said, about 10 years old. And I think some of the approaches that are interesting here are the idea of just changing the topography of the seawall. So they've created some hills, and it's much less about swimming and more about kind of unexpected, interesting uses. And I want to point out this guy on the skateboard here and say that while we were here, we actually saw a gang of about 8 or 10 boys on razor scooters doing exactly that, zooming down there, chucking their razor scooters at the last minute and just jumping in the water, which was amazing. And so after we went swimming in this space, it was here that my daughter, we were kind of getting out, drying off, and my daughter looked at me and she said, why can't we have spaces like this? Like, why can't we have this in Vancouver? And I thought, yeah, that's, why can't we have this in Vancouver? This would be fantastic. So that's the segue for the kid slide, the kid shot. But again, a lot of the space here is just dedicated to hanging out and catching the sun, eating your lunch. And this project is much closer to office buildings and less residential. And then we include this slide really because I think when something gets its own hashtag on Instagram, it really says that there is a pride of place and a love for this, whether it's through locals or visitors. And then one last shot of these two projects that just show them in the context, again, to just note that it's a dense urban context, mixed use, and then similar to, say, Granville or Burrard Bridge, it's right close to the heart of downtown with a heavy bridge adjacent. And it also talks about how it ties into the existing network of the city and also how these two projects kind of build synergy between themselves. The other amazing thing about these two projects for me is that this would never have happened 15 years ago because the harbor in Copenhagen was too polluted. So the government took it upon themselves to change their approach to treatment of things that were going in here, and they cleaned up the harbor. And then I think so fantastic of them to have not just cleaned it up and told people about it, but to create these harbor baths as a way of actually celebrating that success and getting people to go swimming again in downtown Copenhagen. Another couple projects I just want to walk you through. This one is in Aarhus, which is the second largest city in Denmark. We didn't get to visit this one, but it's quite a beautiful sculptural example, less about swimming, more about just exploring the transition between, the beauty of the transition between the water's edge and land and water, really. Another project, also in Aarhus, which is being built now. To me, this is kind of really building on that first project we saw, which is dedicated areas for swimming, certainly, and the spectacle of diving, but really introducing significant public space, amphitheater seating with views over the water and possibly for performance, some kind of community amenity space underneath. And I think in terms of Vancouver's context, really interesting to note that it's a working port. It's really mixing office, residential, and public space together in one location. This project we did get to see, and I'm including it partly because it's just beautiful architecturally. The idea with this one is a bit different. It's actually coming off of a natural beach, and it provides a long pier that provides access to deep water swimming in a protected way. And then the circular form is really about providing a windbreak against prevailing winds to provide a safe and comfortable place for swimming. And it's got, again, places to sit, places to jump here, and as you can see in this photo, not everybody is swimming. It's just a place to go and to be. Another location in Denmark, including this one because it's the slight difference on this project is they focused on paddling, and they provided as part of their facility kind of a rec center, a little community spot to support paddling. And last two projects I want to show are in Oslo, Norway. Again, same kind of thing, a mixture of different types of spaces, some swimming, some overlook, some hangout, some good sunning spots. And then this, very close by, another project also in Norway, same kind of thing, but I also think what's key here for us is you can see in the background, it's a working industrial port. It's got cruise ships, just like Vancouver, and there's the downtown core, and there's some mixed-use housing over here, and it's a great, successful spot, again, as evidenced by Instagram, pride of place. This is showing those two projects, again, just in their urban context, quite a dense situation, and they're considered to be kind of a network or two different amenities along a seawall in Oslo. So this all led us to question, what can we learn from this, and how can we apply this thinking to Vancouver? We know that Vancouverites have a really rich history of water culture, of course from First Nations, and also more recently some really interesting shots we came across of the historic Burrard Inlet swims, and actually a cool shot in the bottom of Kitsilano Pool back when it was just a flow-through tidal pool. And then we ask ourselves, can we do it again? Can we find a way to re-engage more directly with our water through public space? So the next step for us was, what's the right site in Vancouver? How do we determine a good spot where we could pitch this idea? So we set a series of criteria, and we took a look at what was available in terms of Vancouver's coastline. And then really we just sat together and thought, what are some key spots along the coastline that we could consider a project like this? And then we applied a series of qualifiers. So the first one for us was, is it near transit? Because really important for us that it be accessible for people. Next obvious question, is the water clean enough for people to swim in it? So we did some research into coastal health water data, and we unfortunately had to rule some sites out, including False Creek, which would have been a great location. And then we also wanted our project to be seawall adjacent, so we could build on the existing amenity of the seawall. And next, we thought it was quite important to have an urban connection. We were a bit biased towards providing this kind of an amenity in a downtown location. And we were interested in a historical narrative for the site. And then lastly, we wanted to create a new swimming area, not to sort of take away from an existing place where people were already swimming. So what we ended up with in our search and our criteria was a spot in Cole Harbour at the termination of Butte Street. And something interesting we learned when we were doing this project was that there was actually an initiative under Mayor Sam Sullivan called the Blue Ways, kind of a riff on the Green Ways, which was an effort to, I think, bring the marine environment back to the people of Vancouver in a more engaged way. And so this existing Butte Street dock was constructed as part of that initiative. I think the idea was that it would be a welcome for people who were coming in by ocean. And I feel like perhaps it didn't kind of realize the potential that it had, and people aren't quite sure how to use it. And most of the time, in my experience, it sits empty. So just looking at that site, what do we think is interesting about it? Number one, I think, is that it's this termination of an existing Butte Street. It's also very accessible by the seawall and from the water as well. And then looking at that again, to us it seems like it's really a place where things can come together, but there's nothing quite there yet. So we take our job and our site analysis quite seriously, so we thought, we can't ask people to swim unless we try it ourselves. So here's a bunch of us who went down at lunchtime and did exactly that. It was cold, but not that cold. So this renewed our commitment that yes, we wanted to propose this project. So I want to get into the specifics of what would we like to see here and see what you think about this idea. So being architects, we went down to the site, we sketched a bunch of possible ways that we could design a harbor deck for ourselves, and we came up with something like this, which we're calling the Cole Harbor Deck. So here it is in the context. You can see it adjacent to the existing convention center and near Stanley Park. And then some of the key features in the design approach for us were, again, we've got sort of a concrete element here that extends the existing termination to Butte Street, which is actually an existing splash pad. I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but there's a restaurant down there and an existing kind of successful splash pad. So we want to kind of bring that element out into the water and use it to anchor a much more delicate oval wooden structure. And what we're doing really is taking advantage of the existing access ramps that are there for the existing dock. And then some of the features we're proposing would be that the oval walkway be about 250 meters for those of you who might want to do some lap walking and keep track of your distance. We've got some built-in seats and that provide wind, a windbreak and also a comfortable sitting area that is suited for your body. The idea of a raised bridge here, 25-meter swim lanes for people who want to do some recreational swimming, a zero entry or a beach platform to support that. And then on the other side, we're proposing a shallower wading area. And then we've got this sort of playful idea that there could be water hammocks in this part of the project. And then we've got the spectacle of the diving platform. But we're also seeing this as a possible, new viewpoint for Vancouver. So that could be the new location to take a picture of yourself in the city skyline or with the North Shore Mountains on the other side. And then the proposed use for this spot could be a performance area. And then we've got a few viewpoints to show you. One here, looking over the North Shore Mountains of this seating areas. And then one from the water, looking up at the diving platform. Who wants to jump off that? And then one last overview shot, looking back at the convention center. Thanks. So I just want to say in closing, we don't think of this as a pool, and we don't think of it as a park or a pier. We think of it as some version of all of those things, but really we think of it as just a new type of public space for the city of Vancouver. And interestingly, we think it actually ties into a lot of the city's current Greenest City plan to reestablish and develop a new connection with our waterfront. And hopefully it'll be a new urban space Vancouverites will be proud of. So I hope that, we've actually had the chance to pitch this idea to a number of people, some of whom are very enthusiastic about it. But we would love to hear more. So if it's something that you are interested in or something you'd like to see in the city of Vancouver, please get in touch with me. Again, I'm at HCMA Architecture Plus Design, and we'd love to hear your feedback and your thoughts. So thanks to Bill for letting me pitch this idea. Thanks for listening to me on a Sunday afternoon, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.